Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Engineering Career Coach Podcast, where I'll be talking with Margie Oleson. She's a change consultant at Oleson Consulting LLC, an OCM lead at Lockheed Martin. We'll be talking about unique challenges faced by CEOs and top executives. She'll also share some great advice for navigating difficult times in companies, building effective leadership teams, having great meetings, fostering cohesion, and ensuring long-term and sustainable improvements. I'm your host, Jeff Perry. I'm a leadership and career expert and author of The Intentional Engineer. You can find more information on my work at jeff-perry.com. And this is the Engineering Career Coach Podcast, brought to you by EMI, the first podcast dedicated to helping engineers and technical professionals with both their personal and professional development. Now it's time to jump right into the main segment of this episode. I have the pleasure to have with me Margie Oleson. Margie, excited to have you on the Engineering Career Coach Podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. So, Margie, let's just start off. Introduce yourself. Help our listeners know who you are. I know you've had a fun career journey and some lessons that you've learned along the way. So tell us a little bit about that and how that led you to become what you're doing now as an executive coach and leadership expert.
Yeah, so I like to say that I started out as a youngest child. So everybody above me was a leader. I was surrounded by leaders my entire childhood. And when I ended up in corporate America, spent several decades, was finishing some education and was moving into roles where I was a leader. And it was clear to me that we did not have a way to develop as a leader in a way that made sense within a company and certainly not across companies. And I wanted to understand. So I earned a master's in organizational management, and I still wasn't sure. So I understood how organizational pieces fit together. I understood the different, technology and processes and people and how complicated that can be. But I still wasn't sure, why do leaders continue to not really know how best to lead or where they can go for help? Went back to school, earned a doctorate in organization development, and to my surprise, after several years of coursework, we know what we need to know. We had already known at that point 3 decades. Now we're at 4 decades. So when you pick up a book or you're looking at a particular model or a theory, or you're listening to someone talk on a podcast, when they're talking about the principles of what makes leadership doable and effective, those are based on ideas and theories that we've had for decades. So then I did my doctoral research on what is happening here. And there is a gap between what people know and what they're able to execute on. So I've spent the last 10 years in corporate America really trying to understand and develop how to help leaders, because the truth is, leaders do not feel comfortable saying out loud, hey, not sure really how to do this. Nobody has engineered it. Nobody has said, do it just these 3 ways, or you've got these 10 things, or do these systems in a certain order. And so leaders feel like they need to kind of do their best, make it up as they go along. And of course, the greatest learnings a leader has for how to lead is the leaders they've had, and those leaders didn't know either. So it became my passion. I really think the entire company benefits or not from how well leaders are doing. So I developed Top Team Accelerator to do the least amount that you would need to do, and to focus on to put the systems and processes and building blocks in place to have a cohesive leadership team at the top of your division or the top of your company, and know how to lead that ongoing.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting you're talking about we know what to do, but we're not executing on it. So I've heard it called, and sometimes I'll talk about the knowing-doing gap, right? So we know what to do, but we're not doing it. Why is that? Interesting things. What are some of those blockers? You already mentioned some of those around the lack of vulnerability for leaders, and they feel like they can't be open and share that they're struggling or don't know what to do. And that's a big challenge. So you spend a lot of time, Margie, in coaching and working with CEOs and C-suite executives. Give us some insights into some of the challenges that you see that they're facing, and how do you get them to become aware of things that maybe they're not aware of right now, and then to cut through and move forward through some of those challenges they're dealing with?
So we start with what is painful for them already. A CEO will say to me, my team doesn't get along. They gossip and complain and come to me to solve their problems. And I'm talking about tens of thousands of people in one company, and this is the leadership team at the top. They got to these levels by being promoted or hired in, and they're experts in their field. And the senior executive or the CEO says, I didn't expect to feel like I was managing a playground. I was managing students in an elementary classroom. And so, first of all, you've got several different people. And unless you're engineering what to do about that, then everybody is off on their own. And when they come in the door, they do bring their whole selves. They bring their feelings. They bring their vulnerability. They may not talk about it. They may not even know that, but they bring their whole selves. And so when you're setting up shop so that you're running your division or your company, if you don't take into consideration that these are people and that they don't operate like a machine, then you're going to ask them to do things that is not realistic. That's number one. Number two, so they're not machines. Number two, what I didn't realize until we benefited a lot from the neuroscience of the last couple of decades is pretty much all day a leader is executing habits. Now, we might think of our habits around going to the gym, eating a certain type of diet, taking certain types of vacations, building a communications improvement in a particular relationship that's important to us. We might think about habits that way, but did you realize that your culture is a whole bunch of habits? Your leadership and the way you engage with your people, a whole bunch of habits. So if you say we're going to fix our meetings, so one of the things, first thing we do is fix your meetings. If you say we're going to fix our meetings, you might bring a consultant in, you might do a training, you might even try to get everybody to do their meetings kind of in the same way, no meetings on Mondays, or, you'll all try to do things. And then 6 months later, you look back and go, yeah, that didn't work. See, it doesn't really work. Organizations are too complicated. There's too much going on. No, the truth is you didn't change the habits. So you realize the science behind meetings, you got the information. The gap between knowing and doing is you didn't change how you do things. You might have changed it for a day, but the brain doesn't like new. The brain likes familiar, and you reverted eventually back. And you might have reverted back because there was a crisis or a new opportunity. Oh, all hands on deck, everybody, let's shift from the day-to-day to we have this new opportunity or this merger and acquisition or whatever. This is going to take our focus. When what I coach leaders to do is, while you're doing that thing, keep doing your new meeting strategy. And when you do it, and when you stick with it, and when you reinforce it with each other and you go after some little changes that aren't taking place, so you kind of unpack that, once you start to do that over and over again, you have developed new habits, and now you have a high-performing meetings habit. Forbes calls poor meetings an $85 billion problem every year in the U.S. Imagine if you just fixed your meetings. Yeah, I think it is too, because there's probably some things they're not taking into consideration, like morale. But also you have people who are accustomed to going to meetings that aren't effective, and they're fine with that. That's a cost as well. So imagine fixing your meetings, and then imagine taking that same approach with knowledge and habits and recognizing how people learn and how people change because they're not machines, and then have that replicate throughout the rest of your day. The way that you do performance management, the way that you break down silos and start to work across with other departments. Silos are probably the greatest challenge for companies. And when you follow the principles of high-performing leadership and teams, silos naturally go down and you start to become much more functional as a whole organization. So those are examples of we fold into the knowledge we've had for decades. We fold in what we know about neuroscience. We fold in what we know about the human experience in organizations. And then people might say, oh, it's so complicated now, though. Now we've had COVID. We have a new normal. Everything's been really disrupted. The truth is, you set in place the structure and the processes to have a high-performing team and to grow leadership. That will bode well for you for all of these different changes and opportunities. So when you have revolution, it's not because revolution came that you had a huge setback. It's because you weren't prepared because you didn't have the structure and the processes in place. These are timeless, and they will help you regardless of what happens in the future.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you're talking about how so often we just kind of prescribe the actions and behaviors to change, and we're neglecting what's really going on underneath that. You're talking about habits. Usually I'll talk about the principle of mindsets and how they can resist some of that change too, right? The way that we're operating through these. But we need to address things at all levels, get to that root cause of what's really going on there and establish those foundational things, not to say, do this differently and now everything's going to be fine. It's not quite that simple. But we need to reinforce those things mindfully so it becomes who we are, not just create the list of things to do.
A leader cannot control the people on their team, their mindset. What they can do is put the structure, the system, the processes in place so that the mindset can be seen. Right. We talk about that one of the greatest skills for a leader is self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And if you're the kind of subject matter expert, professional leader who doesn't talk about those things at home or at work, it may feel awkward. It may feel uncomfortable. But the truth is, and how I define self-awareness is, I understand what I'm saying and doing and what the impact is on others. And I understand what they're saying and doing and how it impacts me. So if you think of the metaphor of an iceberg out in the ocean, so that you can see the tip of the iceberg is sticking out, and then you have the water line so you can see what's above and you're not able to see what's below. Below is mindset. Below is hidden agendas. Below is concerns, fear, bad things happened to me before, trauma. Above are the things that we can see about someone. If you hang a picture in your office, it might tell me something about you, might tell me what you value. If you wear a certain piece of clothing, or if you're smiling, that may or may not mean that you're happy, but it's at least above. The goal and the way to develop self-awareness, the goal is for the water line to go down and you're living more out loud. The more a leader can be open with their people, the more their mindsets can come along with you. Self-awareness develops naturally. My mindset shifts naturally when my leader's much more open and honest with me. And that doesn't happen overnight. You can't go after trust. You can't say, this Friday, we're going to spend 4 hours and we're going to build trust. It doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, if you do that, you're going to erode trust. You put the clarity in place about what your goals are and what people are supposed to be working on and how they're doing, and trust develops. That's also a way to build self-awareness, is by being really clear at work about what the goals are. What is the person on my team? What is each of them? How do they fit into achieving these goals? And how do I think they're doing, and do they know? I once worked with a client who, by the time they brought me in, they had somebody on a performance improvement plan, but they weren't even going to talk to me about this leader because they were on their way out. That person is a low performer. We had high hopes when we hired them. But I started asking some questions, and it turned out that their processes and their way of working together was not helping this particular leader be more open about what they're struggling with. And also they could see some things that weren't going well, and they weren't in a position of power to say them. So I actually worked with the leader, my client, to ask some questions, to put into place some tools and some conversations, some clear discussions that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, fix their meetings and start to be really clear. This person went off the performance improvement plan and became the high performer that they thought they were getting when they hired them. It was a lot less about what their behavior was and a lot more about what was going on in their mind, but there was no way for anyone to find out. Once they put in the structure so that the person could be clear, clarity will take you a long way, but you have to be open about it. So I work with clients so that they can figure out how to help everyone be more clear.
Yeah, and what a gift that is when everyone has that increased clarity and vulnerability to share, this is what I'm working on. Can we all collectively help each other to reinforce that as we move forward? I recognize that this is a struggle I have, and how beautiful that is to be able to have the trust and psychological safety in a team that says, can you help me with this? I want you to, I'm going to do everything I can to change and shift this, right? But I also want you to help me reinforce that.
We used to think of that as nice to have. There is nothing nice to have about that. It is strategic. No. Right. It is you You will rise above your competitors. You will serve clients better.
Mm-hmm.
You will have talent that stays. You will be able to hire and retain talent because you have created an environment that really creates the format for me to bring you my skills and bring you my creativity and bring you my intuition and bring you my experience. If I can't even be open, or if you're not open with me, and also if you're not open with me, I don't have a permission to be open with you.
Right.
If you're not talking about what you need and you're not telling me how you think I'm doing, I don't want to come to you and talk to you when I have a struggle.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have quarterly or annually performance management. We should have ongoing clarity.
Mm-hmm.
What am I supposed to be working on? Do I have what I need? And how do you think I'm doing? You do all of that, you've got the best performance management system on the planet.
Right, right. So, Margie, we've already talked about a lot of components and principles here. I want to see, can you kind of hone us in? If you were to say, hey, when we think about high-performing leaders and teams, what are the key components that we need to put in place if you're to simplify that a little bit?
And number one is clarity. Number two is alignment, because clarity is inside. I have the same view of something as you, and alignment is we're working well together. So we have to have clarity first, and it starts with the leader. So the leader has whatever goals that they are going to achieve this year, and not 27, 3 to 5. They need to be 3 to 5. And then you want to your people need to be able to recite what those goals are in simple terms. Yeah. I once worked with a 4-person team, but when they brought me in, they were doing a transformation and they thought there were these big complex reasons why it wasn't gaining traction. No, it was because 4 people told 4 different stories about what they were doing and how they were going to get there. 4 people that sat with each other every day and hadn't even told each other on what they're thinking. You need to be thinking out loud, living out loud. So the leader has 3 to 5 of these key goals, and then they have these people on their team. How does each of those teams achieve those goals? And then do they know each other, and how do they know how each is doing and the value each brings, so they know how to ask for help, but also they don't treat them like machines. They treat them like people. I can work with a team for just a day and they can become much more cohesive because they truly didn't know about each other. And I'm not talking about their personal stories. I'm talking about what their background is and what their goals are in their particular role and how it's going and what they need me for. They don't even know that about each other. Without that, you're missing that mind meld. You're missing all of these resources that are at the table, virtual or real, whenever you get together. Once you have cohesion and you start to know each other, and you've talked out loud about behaviors that you're no longer going to say, you no longer are going to put up with. So you start to talk openly about behaviors, not right away, but eventually, that please don't go to your teams and talk about our team. Come here and let's talk openly. And once you get that gossiping and complaining to go down, you start to have much more high performance collectively, individually and collectively, because morale goes up. And they can tap their own skills because they're not so doomed or so downtrodden. Once you have that cohesion place and people have clarity and you have developed alignment, here's who's doing what, these are the decisions you can make, these are the decisions I make. Now you make sure that your operations are today's operations and tomorrow's operations, not yesterday's operations. And do those operations support these goals? And we fix your meetings almost right away. Because people are in meetings all day, and what a crime that is, that they're not going well. Those meetings are not going well. Someone should have stopped it at the very beginning. It's like we put up with it thinking, well, everybody's meetings are like this. That's actually not true. Your meeting should be as engineered and as high performing as something else that you do in your company. Once you have all that in place, then we put in metrics to measure behavior, morale, productivity, awareness. You want to measure clarity. You want to measure alignment. And then also you have now gotten it. You're so organized that you have fewer fires. There's less crisis management. You're not solving the same problems every day. Now you've just freed up time and space to enter new markets, to experiment, to stop having the same problems over and over again. So now you really can look inside your company and say, we have 4 generations in the workplace. How can we best do that? We had a remote only strategy. What are we going to do about the future? You can't even get to that because you're so bogged down. And all of a sudden, people are lighter, they're happier, they're more productive. It's a better place to work with those systems and processes in place.
I love that. And so it really helps us to say, who are we going to be as we interact with each other? And we're talking about that clarity, that alignment, that cohesion that can help us work together instead of those silos like you were talking about earlier. Like, I'm going to do my thing, you do your thing. I don't really care what you're doing as long as you give me what I need and like we're good. It's not anything that actually promotes the innovation and the growth that we need to have so that we can succeed in business these days. So I'm curious, Margie, just to ask now around some of the big organizational challenges when there's like a big shift, like a company merger. I've been a part of those, and it can be really hard. You kind of have like an identity crisis sometimes, or sometimes there are big market shifts or technology shifts that say, hey, we need to completely transform how we're operating. How do leaders navigate those high instances of complexity and change with their teams and with their companies and do that successfully so that they're actually performing well and coming through the other side?
And what I just described, imagine weeks and months in, that leader is becoming a fine leader. Mm-hmm. For the first time in their career, they now have they have a format and they have something to gauge and they have some know-how about how to do that so that as they put those systems and processes in place and they're up and running and some things are taking and some things are taking longer, they're actually learning and growing and sharpening that saw, developing those skills that they're going to be able to transfer to the next thing, the next opportunity or the next challenge. They also will have a structure in place so that it's not slow. It's fast. When you put this structure in place that is the right kind of structure, you are much more light on your feet. One of the first things I do when I come to work with a client is if they have a 20-person leadership team, I'm honest with them and I say, you don't actually have a 20-person leadership team. You probably have 4 or 5 people and they're doing everything. They are the leadership team, but you're letting the other 15 people come to these meetings and feel like they're on the team. You can't do a quick pivot, merger and acquisition with 20 people on the leadership team. Once the leader starts to develop their voice, 2 things about that. Number 1, leaders have to over-communicate, and that's boring. And so they're setting the stage, they're saying what their goals are, but they say it over and over again all year long. And so what happens is they finally start to say, well, why can't HR do that? Or I already told them, they already know. These silos will pop up again if you're not continually helping them renew their vows to your goals, renew their clarity and their alignment around this, and then aim that toward merger and acquisition. So if you're going through a big change, you will take your structure, you will take your systems and processes, and you will build them for that the way you did for this. The problem with M&As is companies are so concerned about the financials and the legal, getting that right, that those are the people that run those teams. So you might put together a really comprehensive M&A team that's going to see through the process, meet once or twice a week for a year and a half. They're going to think about the change management. They're going to think about the untangling. They're going to think about which products stay, which pieces go, all of that. But they're not really going to give power to the people like the change management folks, like the leaders who are good at leading, because they're so worried about the financials and the legal. So you do need to do those correctly. But if you add to that leadership as a capability, leadership as a concrete deliverable, engineering how you're going to replicate high performance, cohesion, ability for people to be part of a bigger, broader, better thing, and then folding people into that, bringing them in, you will have the secret sauce. And that's the same as culture. So let's say we're not talking about an M&A. Let's say you've heard that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, your culture is just all of your habits, and your culture is what is reinforced every day. So if you want to change your culture, let's say you want more diversity, equity, and inclusion, or let's say you want to move away from a production line and you want to shift to a service organization. People will say you can't do that. You cannot change your culture. I'm saying, no, you can't change it without being organized and without looking at your habits and without having the goals be clear and without having clarity and alignment. Once you have those pieces and the right operations to support that and you fixed your meetings, you actually can change your culture. It's your habits are what's eating your strategy, your goals, all of that for breakfast. So if you're about to have a big revolution, well, you're going to aim your systems and processes and structure at that. And then you're going to develop those habits as you go to develop into some sort of semblance.
Yeah, well, it's a great thing to be aware of as we can think about what is actually possible in terms of change, instead of saying, I don't think we can do that. Like, yeah, it's possible if you go about doing things in the right way. Now, Margie, I want to have a discussion. You were talking earlier about how we measure these things as we move through the changes and some of the measurement things we put in place, but also thinking about change doesn't happen in a day or in a week or in a month, but we want to ensure that these improvements, these habits, the culture, and all these things change over time as we continue forward. So how do you actually concretely measure some things and then sustain these changes for long term and continue to make those adjustments to make sure that this is a sustainable long-term shift instead of, hey, we talked about that this month and next month we're on to something new?
Correct. Which is what happens, and it's understandable. There's a lot going on. The challenge with measuring is we haven't engineered that at the right elevation either. So if you have a dashboard and it's got 40 metrics on it, nobody's an expert on that. And and clarity is shared expertise. So if I'm a leadership team and we're pulling up a dashboard that has 40 metrics on it in our meetings, I couldn't possibly have the same view of those 40 metrics as the person sitting next to me or as the person online who's in another state or a country. And mostly there's nothing in there about behaviors or improving our meetings or shifting the culture. With this one piece about the culture, we're going to go after that for the next few months. So we're going to put in a metric about that. So the first thing we do is identify the most important metrics that will tell you where you need to be right now, both in terms of outcomes and in terms of behaviors. And gossip can be a metric. And if that's too difficult because people feel uncomfortable about that, we start with use metrics to identify how you're doing with effective meetings. Starting with meetings is a great one because you are measuring something that is concrete, because we tell you do these 5 things. Okay, are you doing them? But also those metrics start to show how people behaved at the meetings. And so you're getting at a little bit of a less black and white metric, but you're getting at it through something that says you either did it or you didn't. And then once you start to do things like fix your meetings, you are starting to build skills that you can apply in other areas. And one of the first things we want to do is get that 40 metrics list down to 5 to 10 that tell you really where your outcomes are, that are the most important ones, and then add some for process, behaviors, and the way the team is operating. So we add very clear metrics around that. I like to work with teams to say, we're going to do 95% of what we do together is going to be the work that you do as a company. So think of that as dancing. You're on the dance floor. And we're going to spend about 5% of your energy and your time in this process going up to the balcony and observing. So you're going to start to look outside of yourself and look outside of your team to think, okay, is one person doing all the talking? That's a metric. Is one person never talking? That's a metric. And what I love about this process, when you start to put in place you start to engineer it in a way that makes it so that you have a cohesive, high-performing team, you have gifts, strengths, abilities that aren't even tapped right on that same team, even if you don't change anybody. So if you had a huge issue that you haven't been able to address, you have not been able to fix, it's not because you don't have the right people. It might be because your system, your processes, you're not even hearing from them. You're too busy putting out the same fires over and over again. When you start to ask people when they feel like they have free time and they feel like they have energy and they feel like they can be in the moment now because the operations are sound and the meetings are effective and they know who's who around the table, you start to talk about metrics with that group and they'll come up with the right ones. You want the metrics to be the ones that give everyone the same view of outcomes that are the most important that tell you how it's going, and you add some behavior ones. What I notice with things like a RACI, the decision-making matrix, or metrics that you have on a dashboard is, unless you have been really clear with each other, that dashboard's telling a story, but it's not the same story. As you start to do clarity and alignment work, you will put in place forever continuous processes to always go back and make sure that each of us is getting the same story from the metrics that we have, and we will change our metrics until we have the same story. That becomes capabilities. That becomes the way we work together, and it becomes much more normal. So you will start to see changes sustain, and you'll put new developments, like we want to be a high-performing team. You'll put that into your plan, and then as you go through it, you'll check off the list, the pieces that you're accomplishing, and you'll start to add new ones. You won't take it all on in one big chunk. You'll break it down into this logical sequence and go after it in order like that.
Lovely, lovely. And so there's logic to it. We're trying to put the structures in place, reinforce the right things, do the work, but also observe where we're at as we continue forward through the process and reinforce the things we want to change. So, Margie, as we finish off this main section of the episode, I just want to ask you, there's plenty of engineers and technical professionals who listen to this podcast who maybe have ideas or an inkling to think about, maybe I want to go into the leadership side of things. I want to transition towards that. If you're talking to people who aren't formal leaders yet, what would you say to them who are thinking about aspiring towards leadership if they want to enhance their skills and be ready for those moments when they come?
Yeah. First of all, just know that it's not natural. Leadership's not natural because you learned it from the people that led you, and it wasn't natural for them. We might have had great natural leadership from moment one as a baby, but we're surrounded by people that didn't necessarily know how to lead us. So let yourself off the hook for knowing how to be a leader. And you might have had leaders that I don't want to be like that. Well, just know that they didn't know how to be a leader either. So number one, you're going to be looking for the kind of clarity that we described. So whenever you're leading a team, you want to make sure that they always know what you want them to go after and how they think you think they're doing. And so you're going to find yourself, you want to grow your threshold for communicating and over communicating. And so you can read some books, some classes on communication, but just know that when you think you've said it too many times, it's probably not enough. That whole marketing adage, 7 times 7 ways, that's a thing. That has to do with the way the brain is designed. It's not so that we can sell more things. It is 7 times 7 ways because the brain, the first 2 is going to let it pass by because it's too busy keeping us alive. So you're dealing with the people that are going to be your direct reports or underneath your project. If it's a matrix, their brains are just going to go along with all their habits. So that's who you're dealing with. They have feelings and they have brains. Okay. Number 1. Number 2, your greatest strength will be increasing from wherever you're at, your self-awareness. So you will grow your self-awareness by being much clearer about what's happening in the company. What are the company goals? What are your leaders' goals? What are the jobs of the people that are going to be reporting to you? And what do you know about them? And how do you set up your cadence for having communications with them so that they always, always, always have clarity? And then number 3, there are things you can do to grow self-awareness that will just help you in life anyway. You can go to therapy. You can join a group where maybe it's a volunteer group or it's a certain project group or whatever. But if you spend time with other adults, you will start to shed some of the pretense and you'll start to be able to be more open with each other. And when you can be more out loud with each other, you can bring your questions. You can talk about your vulnerabilities, and it may not even feel weird because you're really just there being strategic. Prayer, meditation, going on vacations that are service oriented, having a revolution, some kind of an explosion of your internal process. Let's say somebody in your family is sick. Sometimes we grow our self-awareness naturally because our lives imploded. Anything you can do to develop emotional intelligence, and you can read about it and study it, but then try some things. Find another person that you trust to partner with them. Anything you can do to grow your self-awareness will help you do all the leadership that will come at you in the process.
Great thoughts there, Margie. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for this episode so far and the conversation we've had. At this point, we're going to transition over to the Take Action Today segment of the show. When we come back, we'll get one final piece of actionable advice from Margie. We'll be right back. Now it's time for our Take Action Today segment of the show. Margie, we've talked about a lot of different things in this episode, but one of the things that really stood out that is a big problem, as you mentioned from Forbes, is the meetings and how much time is wasted, how ineffective sometimes they are. And engineers sometimes get a bad rap for just hating meetings. So if you were going to share with our listeners, what is one thing that they can do and take action on to improve the quality of their meetings?
So separate out your strategy from your tactics. Talk about your tactics in weekly meetings and make sure you have the right people there to do that. And when you want to talk about bigger picture, longer term, making some changes, you want to have those be separate. And when you don't have the right people in the conversation, then you're going to have tactical topics come up when you're dealing with strategy, which means you can't really get to the better strategies. And when you're in a strategic meeting and you start talking, or when you're in a tactical meeting and you start talking strategy, now you've missed the whole big picture opportunity and you have some issues with tactics that you aren't getting to. The greatest strategy that you can use for your meetings is get to the point where you feel comfortable telling people you're not needed in this meeting. Don't start a meeting by saying, hey, what should we talk about today? Make sure you have agendas that get you where you need to go and only have the people there that will take you there. And if you don't feel comfortable telling people that you're not needed at this meeting, that's some of the other work you can do in your organization to start living more out loud.
Yeah, love it. So separate strategy and tactics and get just the right people there to take care of the right things and have an agenda. So thanks so much, Margie, for that. And as we wrap up here, I'm sure there's going to be people who want to connect with you, learn more about you and the work that you do. So where would you point them to learn more?
So you can go to topteamaccelerator.com. So Top Team Accelerator is my methodology, and topteamaccelerator.com has a team assessment on there that's free. You just click the button, and then you can walk through 15 questions to really understand what we're saying are the least amount of activities you want to have in place for a high-performing team. You don't have to give your email. You don't have to sign up for anything. You can just take it. Nobody's going to know what you say. And then there's some, based on your results, there's some recommendations for what to do next. I also have a button on there to go over to my website.
All right, topteamaccelerator.com. So thanks so much, Margie. Really appreciated all the insights and wisdom you shared with us and wish you continued success in all the work that you do. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and questions. You can go to engineeringmanagementinstitute.org where you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in the episode, as well as links to any of the resources or websites that we mentioned in the episode. And don't forget to check out any upcoming live webinars for this month at the website as well. Additionally, for any engineers who feel like they need extra help taking the next career step or finding clarity in their careers, I've created some free training resources with an opportunity to join a more intensive program called the Engineering Career Accelerator. You can find more information at engineeringcareeraccelerator.com, or you can go grab my Career Clarity Checklist found at www.engineeringcareeraccelerator.com/career-clarity. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering endeavors.